Hello, welcome to the Internet for All webinar series. My name is Shannon Williams Mitchum, and I serve in the Office of Minority Broadband Initiatives. Start my video. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Internet for All webinar series. My name is Shannon Williams Mitchum, and I serve in the Office of Minority Broadband Initiatives within the Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, or NTIA. I'll be serving as today's moderator. In today's webinar, we will discuss what successful local coordination and outreach activities looks like for Internet for All programs to engage local governments, community groups, union and worker organizations, tribal governments, and underrepresented populations. Here's a look at today's agenda. Director of Technical Assistance, Amanda Herrera, will cover our local coordination overview and requirements. Division Chief of Tribal Connectivity and Nation-to-Nation Coordination, Adam Geisler, will go over tribal consultations and coordination. Broadband Program Specialist, Julia Puladindi, will talk about local coordination and action. And then we'll move into our moderated question and answer session and be joined by Michelle Morton, Broadband Program Specialist in the Digital Equity Program. Please note that you may submit your questions at any time by entering them in the question and answer function on your Zoom module. I will now turn it over to Amanda Herrera.
Thanks so much, Shannon. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Herrera, and I'm the Director of Technical Assistance with the Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth here at NTIA. Today, we're going to talk about the local coordination requirements that are found both in the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or the BEAD program, and the Digital Equity programs. While these are two separate programs, local coordination is a foundational element of both programs, and we highly encourage states and territories to align their local coordination efforts to be able to conduct cohesive outreach and engagement with stakeholder groups, with tribal governments and other key entities, and be able to do that in one cohesive fashion. So today we're going to talk about the requirements of both programs and some of the best practices in how to implement those requirements. Local coordination is an important part of both the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program and the Digital Equity Act programs. In the BEAD program, local coordination must begin with the 5-year action plan and should continue throughout the duration of the program, including the initial and final proposals. Under the Digital Equity program, it's very important that states develop and conduct outreach that includes the specific covered populations in the law. This outreach and coordination should include an opportunity for public comment by and collaboration with these specific covered populations. Given that local coordination is such a large part of these programs, it's important to talk about why we want to do local coordination. There are several reasons that local coordination is key to program success. First, local coordination opens up a dialogue to be able to better identify and understand community priorities and needs. Second, it builds early buy-in for high-speed internet deployment. It energizes stakeholders and mobilizes others to take action toward broader goals. It improves transparency, which can build trust and credibility. Additionally, it fosters joint ownership of the state or territory's mission through partnerships that will drive success. It reduces barriers to internet access and adoption and has a positive impact on initial adoption rates. And finally, it ensures that the needs and priorities of stakeholders that have historically been left out of the public planning processes are taken into account and accounted for. Now that we've established that local coordination is critical for the overall success of the programs, it's important to answer the question, what is local coordination? So local coordination is about outreach efforts, and there are 5 broad criteria that we'll look at in determining whether sufficient local coordination has occurred. The first is full geographic coverage. The coordination has to include tribal, rural, suburban, and urban areas. This also means that each political subdivision or tribal or native entity has to be given an opportunity to submit to the eligible entity its own plan for consideration and an opportunity to be able to comment on the plans that the eligible entity is developing. Second, it involves a diverse set of stakeholders. This means that states and territories must go out and include a broad group of individuals at the table. This includes local government, this includes tribal governments, this includes other state agencies, community anchor institutions, community organizations, nonprofits. Really, we want to create a very large table and bring everybody together to participate in the conversation. The third thing is that there has to be a variety of awareness, outreach, and participation mechanisms. This coordination has to include multiple mechanisms to ensure there's broad awareness and participation. This means that you can't just post something on a website and call it good for local coordination. Instead, we need to employ a variety of mechanisms to ensure that we're able to reach all different stakeholder groups. Example mechanisms include listening sessions, public meetings, both virtually and in person in the communities themselves, websites, social media, and we'll talk more about some of the other potential outreach mechanisms that states and territories may want to employ. The fourth thing is transparency. Coordination has to include clear procedures to ensure transparency. This is things like periodic reporting to make sure that everybody knows what's going on and is able to be involved in the process. And the last criteria that we're going to look at is underrepresented engagement. Coordination has to include those communities that have historically faced barriers to participating in federal programs. States and territories need to develop specific strategies to ensure that these populations are brought into and included in the process. So we're going to talk about each one of these things individually. So first, let's talk about full geographic coverage. So on this slide, what you can see here are different segments of the Notice of Funding Opportunity requirements that really lay out the program guidelines broken out that talk about full geographic coverage. So under the BEAD program, local coordination has to include all areas of the state. And there's a very similar requirement for the State Digital Equity Planning Grant Program. So it's really important that as states are developing their plans around local coordination, that they're really taking into account all areas of the state. The second thing is there has to be an opportunity for local plan submission. This includes both plans from local governments and tribal governments. Those entities must be able to submit plans for consideration to the states to be incorporated into the overall plan. And finally, there has to be an opportunity for local feedback to be given on the plans that the state is developing through a type of comment process. So there's flexibility within these guidelines for states to develop and implement a process that makes the most sense for each state, but it must include all of these components. So let's talk about what are some of the best practices as it relates to full geographic coverage. So it's really important that states engage a variety of stakeholders across all areas of the state and territory. They need to invite stakeholders with diverse priorities and opinions to provide their perspectives to understand their local community needs and collaborate on the BEAD and DE activities. They need to engage with stakeholder groups of different types and from all areas of the state. It's also really important that states and territories ensure that all voices are heard. So some communities may not have the resources to be able to develop elaborate plans or even to develop any plan at all. So states should be proactively reaching out and engaging with these groups to solicit input on the plans that the state is developing and incorporating their feedback into the plan. So let's talk about the next group. Diverse stakeholder groups is the next criteria that we're going to look at. Both the BEAD and the State Digital Equity Planning Grant programs outline key stakeholders that eligible entities and grant recipients may engage. So really, this is about creating a very large table and inviting everybody to have a seat at the table. We have community anchor institutions, county and municipal governments, nonprofit organizations, civil rights organizations, educational agencies, workforce development agencies, public housing authorities, tribal governments, Alaskan Native entities, Native Hawaiian organizations, other tribal entities that may not officially be tribal governments, organizations that represent individuals with disabilities or aging individuals, individuals with language barriers, veterans, incarcerated individuals, state and other state and territorial agencies, labor organizations and unions, internet service providers, faith-based organizations, higher education institutions, public utility commissions, economic development organizations and chambers of commerce, advocacy groups and organizations that represent people of color, LGBTQI individuals, immigrant communities. Really, states should be thinking very broadly about what it means to include diverse stakeholder groups. Looking at some of the best practices in this area, as states are engaging a large and diverse group of stakeholders, they should feel empowered to collaborate with other groups not explicitly named in the NOFO, including members of the community who have experienced living a disconnected life. So we really encourage states and territories to think about who in their state are experiencing what it's like to not be able to be connected, and to engage those groups as they're developing a plan to serve those groups of people. Also, we recommend incorporating a diversity of voices to develop a 360 understanding of each community's needs. In this process, it's very important to build trust and credibility. Building strong relationships can be time-consuming and resource-intensive, but it's worth it and leads to a much stronger outcome. And so we highly recommend the upfront investments to build trust and credibility in this process. States should also identify which topics are most impactful and invest early and often in bringing other voices to the table in these conversations. The next area that we're going to talk about is awareness, outreach, and participation. Eligible entities should employ multiple awareness, outreach, and participation mechanisms to ensure that they're able to reach a wide array of individuals and groups. This is, there are a number of different example methods listed on this slide, and states and territories are not limited to these, are encouraged to think creatively and design mechanisms that work well for their state. Some of these examples include listening sessions or public meetings, websites, or email addresses where you're able to submit comments directly, informational materials such as fact sheets, brochures, frequently asked questions, newsletters, social media, email notifications, and use of traditional mail. It's important to remember in trying to reach people that may not have internet access to look at ways that you can reach them that may not utilize the internet as well. So we mentioned traditional mail on here. Utilization of community anchor institutions to promote and distribute information. A lot of the community anchor institutions are trusted partners in the community and can be a great vehicle to be able to share your message. And finally, we have local advertisements or public service announcements. Looking at some of the best practices in this area, one great thing that states and territories can do is leverage existing forums for collaboration. So identify and leverage existing engagement processes, mechanisms, and touch points. Where are these groups meeting regularly so that you're able to maximize efficiency and reach? You don't have to recreate the wheel. Not all local coordination has to be a new convening. Find out where the people that you're trying to reach are and go to them. Ask to attend regular meetings and events to build relationships and encourage participations from stakeholders. Also, co-create solutions. Solicit direct feedback from stakeholders on the plans that the state and territory is developing and incorporate that feedback into the process. Share sections of the plan while it's still under development to improve relevancy, transparency, and buy-in. Transparency. There are several transparency requirements in the BEAD program and implicitly in the State Digital Equity Grant Program. And on the left side of the screen, you can see those requirements. What this is about is trying to promote transparency so that everybody knows what's going on and has faith in the process. Some of the things that eligible entities may do to help with transparency is to host easily navigable websites with up-to-date publicly available information. Additionally, conducting periodic reporting and submitting reports to local and community stakeholders. Involve diverse stakeholders in the implementation and execution of coordination and outreach efforts, activities, meetings, and communications. So as we look at best practices as it relates to transparency, establishing a sustained, transparent approach to local coordination is key to building trust and demonstrating responsible stewardship of state and local resources. States should establish procedures and relationships that promote sustained coordination. Decide what you're going to do as a state or territory, communicate that to your stakeholders, and follow through with what you said you're going to do. Engagement with communities should be ongoing and continuous. Involve stakeholders at all stages in the development of plans to improve participation, promote buy-in, and sustain engagement. Go beyond just posting information online and opportunities to comment on that plan. Instead, work with communities and stakeholders to gather data and input before the plans are created. As plans mature, objectives for your stakeholder engagement may change, but you should continue to thoughtfully include stakeholders throughout your efforts. Additionally, states should commit to transparency and accessibility. Communicate early and often about plan development. Offer clear guidance on how to give input, whether it's an email, a website, a phone number, an address. Consider setting periodic reporting timelines, monthly, quarterly, annually, and strive to make up-to-date information available. Something else that's really important to keep in mind is to keep accessibility and inclusivity top of mind. Think about your audience and plan meetings and design materials that are inclusive to people that have vision, hearing, mobility, cognitive, and other disabilities. Be thinking about what are the barriers to accessing the information and how are you able to remove those barriers? And finally, our last section that we're going to talk about is underrepresented engagement. And so specifically in the BEAD program, states and territories are required to engage unserved, underserved, and underrepresented communities and consider those communities that have historically faced barriers to participating in federal programs. On the Digital Equity Planning Grant Program, the law specifically calls out 8 covered populations. These covered populations include low-income households, aging populations, incarcerated individuals, veterans, people with disabilities, people with language barriers, racial and ethnic minorities, and rural inhabitants. So states, as they're doing this engagement, need to specifically focus on those populations. Looking at our best practices in this area is that states should pursue an integrated, holistic approach to stakeholder engagement. Though the BEAD and the digital equity programs are separate, a holistic approach to stakeholder engagement will reduce the burden and confusion on stakeholders and contribute to stronger end results. Eligible entities participating in the programs should pursue combined efforts. So at the outset, assemble a comprehensive list of stakeholders, identify the overlaps, and coordinate and combine outreach to those stakeholders. Plan and host combined listening sessions, combined surveys, combined site visits. Develop asset mapping in tandem. Really what we want to see states do is be able to combine these efforts together so that we're looking both at the requirements of the BEAD program and the digital equity program and establishing a cohesive overall plan to provide internet for all in each of these states and territories. And so now I'm going to kick it over to Adam Geisler to talk specifically about working with tribal governments and tribal consultation.
Mashum Lovik, Amanda, thank you. Miriam, Machashik Shotna, Madam Geisler, Non Lanoinai Bayom, Kuichimaichish. Hello, and my name is Adam Geisler. I'm an enrolled member and citizen of the La Jolla Band of Liseño Indians and the Division Chief for the Tribal Connectivity and Nation-to-Nation Coordination Division. And it is my honor to chat with you today a little bit more in detail about the tribal consultations and coordination process for consideration as you move forward in your state engagement plans. All right, so tribal consultation and coordination boils down to some really simple things. At the end of the day, it's about having a meaningful dialogue with folks that have experienced some really unique and challenging processes throughout the course of history related to high-speed internet, amongst other things. persistent poverty in the community based upon historical trauma and other items related to the history. And then, frankly, what you will hear is concerns about a historical disinvestment or lack of investment by federal and state agencies, among other factors that tie back to treaties. And so you'll hear some of those discussions. I also want to point out that most tribal communities today don't have high-speed, reliable, affordable internet services. Often it is unreliable with very slow speeds, and where there is access, it's often very expensive. Just coming out of Alaska a little over a month ago, we were seeing bills anywhere from $800 to $1,800 a month for bare minimum speeds. We're talking well below 25.3 access. Engaging tribal stakeholders is critical to understanding the community's challenges and coordinating resources to meet their needs on the front end. And my big concern that I just want to put out there and make sure everybody is aware of is that this does need to happen on the front end. I don't think any community likes the idea of somebody planning for them without their knowledge, input, or consent, and then somebody delivers a solution that they can't either access or afford or agree with for their own economic needs or their own health, culture, or educational goals that they have as it relates to high-speed internet access. BEAD, for that matter, does require tribal consultation, right? So to the extent that the eligible entity encompasses sovereign, tribal, or native entities, the eligible entity must ensure that such entities are involved in the development of the eligible entities plans. And we do mean that. We're really hoping and looking for your meaningful engagement around working with tribes in this process. And one of the ways it's pretty popular ensuring that you receive that feedback is the conduct of formal tribal consultative processes with the eligible entities or with federally recognized tribal governments. Digital equity also requires that the state describe how you plan to collaborate with key stakeholders, and that includes Indian tribes, Alaska Native entities, and Native Hawaiian organizations. So again, we're talking about having meaningful upfront engagement with our respective indigenous populations, and I'm going to double down on the federally recognized tribes when I say that. So meaningful consultation starts with notification, and a meaningful dialogue should be conducted by the most senior levels of government and be on a government-to-government basis. And so it is not uncommon to have the governor kick off a consultation or a governor's cabinet member to kick off a consultation. Now, I also recognize that there are probably a lot of governors that can hold the high-speed internet discussion, but there's probably some that would prefer to use a subject matter expert, and that is okay. But at the highest, most senior levels, these engagements should be kicked off with the most senior leaders of that particular state or that particular government. And usually it is appropriate, it's not usually, it is appropriate that those senior officials stay on as long as they can, or that they do provide notice if they do need to leave, that somebody has the authority to speak on their behalf. And so you'll see here in the comments, at a minimum, a senior official should be present, obviously, to kick things off, and then, turn it over to whoever the subject matter expert is in their team. But I am going to double down and say it would be great to see senior leadership stay on these consultative engagements. So how does this all start? States need to send a Dear Tribal Leader letter, so we call them Dear Tribal Leader letters, to each tribal government requesting to engage in tribal consultation. And you're going to find that some tribes are going to jump on that right away, and some tribes are not going to want to engage in consultative process. But it is appropriate that you do the outreach on the front end. And part of the Dear Tribal Leader letter is not only identify that you're wanting to engage in consultation, but that you identify the topics for which you're consulting upon and the questions. And this is really intended to ensure that things stay within the bumpers for both parties. Right. If you just have an open consultation, I think that's what makes folks nervous sometimes is, are you fielding everything under the universe? The answer is no. I mean, the intent of these Dear Tribal Leaders letters is really to, one, be respectful of the nation-to-nation engagement, and two, to outline what it is that you're wanting to have that conversation about so that they can bring their subject matter experts to the table and their team to have a meaningful dialogue about how things should happen. I should also note that Dear Tribal Leader letters are often signed by the most senior level of government. It is not uncommon to see governors author. In fact, I would put wet signatures on these letters. It's not uncommon for that to happen in many states. But again, this is a government to government relationship that we're talking about, and you are reaching out to a tribal nation's most senior leadership, and that should be reciprocated within the local and state governments. States should prepare questions and identify what specifically they intend to consult upon to include in the Dear Tribal Leader letter, as I said before. And at a minimum, states should ask for tribes to share their current plans to be included in the state plan and identify if they have secured funding for implementation. And this is a big deal. I know a lot of you are thinking, well, hey, NTIA, you have all these plans. Can't you just share those with us? And the answer is no, we don't just go around sharing folks' information or what they applied for or what their plans are without their consent. And consent is a big part of the business that I think we're all trying to conduct here, is making sure everybody has buy-in. And so, I do encourage you, as part of your initial outreach to tribes in your Dear Tribal Leader letter, to request from them that they share what their plans are, so you can incorporate those into your current state plan. Also, let's be honest here. Every government is in different positions and phases as they look to bring high-speed internet service to their communities. And there are going to be some tribes that need assistance in putting their plans for inclusion into the state plan process. And, I'm going to, again, just highlight that the planning dollars that states have available to them, this is absolutely an activity that you should look at leveraging those funds to help support and assist tribes that want to participate in this process. Also, you should look at how tribes would like to be included in the state plan, and if they would like to be a sub-grantee during implementation or leverage the state's expertise. And I realize that this is kind of a contracting between states and tribes is always a sticky discussion, but on the front end, I definitely want to highlight that you should know up front if the tribe wants to be a sub-grantee and start those conversations now, because I imagine lawyers will be involved like many things in life when you're doing business between governments, and it's probably a good idea to start those conversations now. And then lastly, I think another thing you want to make sure is that there's a clear delineated point of contact at the tribe in terms of who to move forward with in their coordination. So you're not wandering around. And I will just say, some tribes, you may be shocked. Maybe their roads director is going to be the person that's going to be handling this, because that's kind of the infrastructure person in their cadre of programs. And it may be the tribal leader themselves. It may be 2 or 3 people. It may be the environmental director. But it's really important that when you walk out of the consultative process, that you understand how the tribe wants to be engaged and what degree they want to be engaged and who you should be coordinating with at the very least in terms of when you're conducting your consultation, so that this process can continue to unfold. So you're going to hear folks say meaningful consultation and the consultative process itself. Adam, what does consultation look like? And I'm just going to say at a very high level, this is intended to give you a rough outline of an approach to take. Consultation can take a lot of different forms, but I think at the bare minimum, let's just make sure that we have a couple of key points that we talk about here. The first is budgeting appropriate time. You're engaging in a nation-to-nation conversation, and it should be a two-way dialogue. And dialogue of this nature really does require the appropriate amount of time to have these in-depth discussions. I'll also point out, maybe you need to do more than one consultation. Maybe you need to look at doing them regionally. That being said, it's not uncommon for us at NTIA doing nationwide consultations to schedule 4-hour blocks. And we typically do 3 consultations to give folks availability to join us. But essentially, consultations should last anywhere from 1 to 8 hours, depending on the number of tribes. So those of you with a lot of tribes, you're definitely going to need to be budgeting more time. I'll also say, again, that some states you may want to look at things from a regional perspective. And I don't mean to call anybody out, but I'm going to. California, for example, 109 federally recognized tribes. it's a lot of territory to cover. That's a lot of tribes to cover. You may want to look at regionalizing your consultations. My friends in Alaska, I'm also going to put this out there. Again, 220 plus federally recognized tribes in Alaska, same thing. I would definitely look at regionalizing your approaches. So with that being said, let's talk about the rest of the process. So consultations almost always start with a tribal leader or a spiritual leader or an elder that gives an opening blessing or invocation. And traditionally, this is really meant to lay a foundation of people coming together. You'll hear folks say in a good way, but it's to show good intent between the parties that are sitting down to have a dialogue. Don't be surprised if the tribal leaders pray for you or want to bring to the conversation a nature of goodwill and an open dialogue to solve problems. This is pretty common, so don't be shocked by it. But I would encourage you to have a placeholder on there and ahead of time, identify who the tribal leader or spiritual leader or elder would be that would be giving the blessing or the invocation. I would also say that depending on where you're doing the consultation, a lot of times will drive who you ask in terms of doing the opening blessing or invocation. Also, if you need help in terms of somebody that can liaise with this process, my team stands ready to help. We have a pretty deep Rolodex here. So if you need assistance in your respective states, you don't have to do this on your own. I guess that's the other thing I want to point out here. We're here to help you. So if you need to find somebody to do the invocation or blessing, we're happy to help do that. Opening remarks should be offered to one delegate for each government represented. This includes the state leadership. So it's not uncommon to have the governor come on or the cabinet member come on and provide their opening statements. But in that same breath, you should also be giving a reciprocal offering to the tribes that are present, to the senior leadership from each tribe that is present. And I do want to say that you also don't have to open it up to every member of that particular tribe. I mean, it's important that the tribe speaks with one voice and that the state is speaking with one voice, and that opening remarks should be available to not only the state official, but each respective tribal government that is represented. Because again, each of those is a distinct sovereign nation. Some may not have comment, and that's okay, but it's appropriate to offer opening remarks. When you're engaged, right? So you've sent your list of questions and you are now engaging in this dialogue. It is okay to give an overview of the questions in terms of the moderator sharing those, right? So an overview of questions should be provided by the consultation moderator. If you guys are doing slides, it's okay to do a refresher of what you sent out in the Dear Tribal Leader letter. And again, just recap those questions. I would also encourage you not to just open up, if you have 5 questions you're asking, to just open it up. I would go question by question and close out the feedback for each of those questions before jumping into another one. That does mean you're going to hear from tribal leaders more than once. But again, this is a big deal. We're trying to solve the digital divide for everybody in this process. And it's important that you capture what's being said in relationship to each one of these topics. It also helps to create a record around what the interests were from everybody at the table and help to document that outcome. So as you've heard me say, it should be a dialogue with tribal leaders or their designee. They may designate somebody no different than the governor or the state may want to do. And be prepared to share what you do know, what you don't know, and what you'll need to come back with at the table. And for a lot of you, your first consultation, there's going to be a lot of, you may need to come back, and that's okay. What I would just encourage you to do again is to make sure that you understand the feedback. So if a tribal leader delivers a host of statements in response to a question, I really encourage you to go back and ensure that you heard what they were saying correctly, so things aren't lost in interpretation. I want to double down on that. It's also, I think, a good demonstration that folks are being heard accurately in terms of what it is that they're sharing. And that's part of that dialogue. It's no different than engaging with anybody else outside of this, where if you don't understand something, you want to make sure you do and that you understood what they're saying clearly. Lastly, each tribe should have the opportunity to engage and provide their feedback to the consultation questions posed. I've kind of already said this, right? I do recommend a question by question approach and allowing that to happen. I also want to remind everybody that it's okay to remind the leaders on the line that they can submit their comments back in writing. It's not uncommon to leave a window of 30 days open for feedback. And a lot of times we at NTIA try to schedule our consultations towards the end of that 30-day time frame. So tribal leaders have time to review the Dear Tribal Leader letter, digest it, prepare their comments if they're going to engage in dialogue, as well as prepare their written comments. So again, engage and provide feedback in the consultative process. You really just want to come at this in a way that is honest and upfront, and that gives a clear delineation of timeline. All right, so meaningful consultation continued. Right, we've talked about notification. We've now talked about things that you should do in terms of engagement with the invocation and making sure you're having a reciprocal conversation and folks are being heard and that process. But let's talk about what comes after the consultation. It is appropriate, and you should record these consultations. Again, it's a record that just, I think, enshrines what was said. It also allows people to go back to what was said into the future, along with making a transcript available. And then I'll also say that if you have any determinations that come out of the consultation, and I know I'm jumping a little bit here, but it's not uncommon to do a tribal consultation summary report where you actually document what was said, what was heard, and then any actions that were taken as a result of that. And again, if you go to the NTIA tribal landing page, you'll see our tribal consultation recordings, the transcripts, and a consultation summary report of everything that we heard, and then the conclusion that we drew, or the action that we are proceeding to take. I would also say it's appropriate post-consultation, or even at the end of your last consultation, if you are seeing a need to engage again, that you look at scheduling future consultations based upon those outcomes. So, you may walk away from consultation number one knowing a date. Some of you are going to be working with not as many tribes. It's maybe more manageable to do it. Others of you, you're right, there may be a lot more logistics involved, and the date will be forthcoming on whatever the additional consultations may need to have occur. But I guess at the end of the day, what I want to make really clear here is that consultation is not a one and done. There should be some sort of a document that encapsulates what was discussed and any decisions that came out of it. You should definitely record and post a transcript up there. And then it's not a one and done. So you should be looking at ongoing consultative engagement where there are key decisions that need to be made that have impacts to that to tribal nations within as neighbors to you in your respective states. Okay, this gets its own slide because it's a big deal. Tribal consent will be required for projects on tribal lands. So for those of you that are looking at hiring a consultant to go and deliver services across the state, you're going to do one massive procurement, I am really going to encourage you that before you engage in that contract vehicle, that you sit down with the tribes, and that whatever solution is being proposed by the state in whoever you're going to look to procure, that it includes the consent of the tribe around what that solution is. A lot of you have tribal lands that are going to need to be traversed in order to run middle mile and maybe even some last mile solutions. And their consent is going to be a requirement of your state plan. And so again, I'm just going to make this really simple. This is about people talking to people, ensuring that nobody's making decisions about somebody's respective land use without their consent and buy-in. And this is also, I think, to make sure that as you're looking at the digital economy and the deployment of these services and the job opportunities and all these great things that are going to be coming from the deployment of this infrastructure, that it be done in a way where there's good partnerships and respect done or due between the tribal nations and neighbors such as states, counties, and federal lands, et cetera. So if you didn't see it on the slide, tribal consent is going to be required for projects on tribal lands. So start now and start early. All right, so when and how to engage tribal entities early and often at any stage of their high-speed internet project planning journey is always appropriate, including to prepare them for applying to the TBCP program and other funding notices. I would also say engaging tribal entities to support coordination with them for the state Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program and the Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program. And then lastly, during the development stages of grants and deliverables, et cetera. I mean, again, engage early, engage often. Not everything requires a consultation. I'll just put that out there as well. If you need guidance from our team, we're happy to talk through if we believe there's a need to do further consultation on a matter. But I'll just put it at a very high level. Good dialogue, frequent dialogue around this is going to limit the amount of consultation you're going to have to do in the long run, because you're already going to have a good sense of what the tribes are looking for as partners in the state planning activities, whether it's for BEAD or for digital equity, and then how to engage. Make sure that make tribal entities aware of the resources dedicated to them under the bill. Our team is going out socializing this information, but there's nothing stopping you from also socializing this information and letting folks know that they're aware. In fact, that I think is definitely part of the engagement process we're hoping to see. Identify tribal entities with existing state and federal partnerships or a history of high-speed internet planning and deepen the connection with them. There are some amazing champions that are out there, some known and some that are just coming to the forefront. And I would, again, just encourage you to work on identifying who those folks are leading into this, because they can actually help those champions, as many of you know, I think, can bring other folks to the table that may be hesitant or may not fully understand the nuances of the BEAD program or the bipartisan infrastructure law funding in general. And then lastly is assist in developing grant deliverables. There are many tribes that are ready to tackle this, and there are many tribes that need help. And again, this is about solving the digital divide that impacts everybody, and the opportunity to assist tribes in helping develop their plans or helping address middle mile solutions that meet their needs and your needs and the collective needs of the region, of the community, and the local economy is all stuff that's on the table. So engage often, engage frequently. It's okay to meet for coffee, lunch, just to get to know folks as well. I also want to make that really clear. The best work that I've ever done in my life has not always happened at a round table or at a conference. It's happened over lunch or getting to know somebody and talking about what their wants and needs are and planning those things collectively. So, all right. Well, I think we've covered a lot. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Julia Puladindi, to go over the local coordination and action topic next. Nishun Lovakam, thank you, and over to you, Julia.
Thanks, Adam. I'm Julia Puladindi, and I'm a broadband program specialist here at NTIA, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what local coordination actually looks like in action. So there are several strategies that can be achieved that can be used to achieve a holistic and thorough approach to local coordination. And grant recipients should develop an approach that best meets the unique needs of their state or territory. While local coordination activities will happen in different ways, they can be organized and planned according to strategies that involve communication, consultation, coordination, and communication activities generally involve sharing information and or providing updates to stakeholders in order to give visibility into broadband or digital equity plans. This would include posting information on public websites, social media posts, outreach through newsletters, flyers, and other print materials, and also public webinars. Consultation activities involve direct and targeted outreach to stakeholders to gather input. So it'll be more along the lines of town halls, road shows, listening tours, focus groups, and surveys done to collect input on specific items, engage stakeholders that have been historically underengaged, and also create buy-in amongst those stakeholders. Coordination involves the coordination and connection of interdependent stakeholder groups who may have already been active in broadband efforts, and it helps them to accelerate efforts and reach solutions supported by stakeholders that might have differing priorities. So these activities will involve summits, network creation, and also the provision of technical assistance. And then finally, collaboration involves working directly alongside stakeholders to develop solutions and make decisions jointly. Given that broadband deployment and digital equity plans will impact a diverse group of stakeholders across each state and territory, The collaboration is not only key to incorporating the diversity of perspectives that these groups offer, but also creating a sense of ownership in the plans. This may be accomplished through sustained coordination activities like working groups, councils, task forces that work together to co-develop and draft plans. So what do these strategies actually look like in practice? Sometimes it's easier to see real life examples to best understand how to adapt these to your own state or territory. So under communication, the state of Louisiana had conducted road shows. In addition to the roadshow, they distributed monthly stakeholder newsletter and hosted them on a website where news, events, blogs are posted in one centralized location so that people know exactly where to go to find this information. This enables the distribution of materials and program updates and information on upcoming deadlines and events being directly communicated from the broadband office director to stakeholders across the state. In Detroit, Michigan, they've conducted consultation activities by establishing shared values and using data to create a unified understanding, which serves as a solid starting point to appeal to decision makers. Under coordination in Oakland, California, stakeholders convened together a variety of stakeholders, including the City of Oakland, the Oakland Unified School District, the Oakland Public Education Fund, Oakland Promise Tech Exchange, and other community-based organizations came together to form Oakland Undivided. And this organization uses these groups to coordinate a distribution, a tech check survey to collect accurate information about student internet and access and device access, which ultimately helps target efforts to increase home access to computer and internet for public school students from low-income backgrounds. And under collaboration, a good example of that is the state of Minnesota's governor's task force on broadband access, which is made up of 15 cross-sector members who meet monthly. And this task force serves as a bridge entity between coalitions and the state and publishes an annual report on broadband in the state. So now I'm going to talk about an example plan for outreach and local coordination. Grant recipients participating in the BEAD and State Digital Equity Planning Grant Program should endeavor to develop one cohesive plan for stakeholder engagement that meets all the requirements of both programs. Again, the application of local coordination strategies should be tailored to the unique needs of each state and territory, but in general, local coordination may follow the following process, which begins with assessing the landscape of the organizations and stakeholders within your state or territory. State and territories should assemble a comprehensive stakeholder list that includes stakeholders for both the BEAD and Digital Equity Program, identify overlaps and coordinate or combine outreach to those stakeholders. This initial step should also serve as an opportunity to understand and take inventory of organizations in the state or territory that represent and are trusted by underrepresented or covered populations within the state or territory. With an understanding of the landscape of your stakeholders, grant recipients can then begin initial outreach. And this should involve a diversity of outreach mechanisms and forums and continued engagement and follow-up with the organizations. States and territories should also ensure that tribal entities and plans are incorporated where applicable. And as outreach is conducted, it's very important to track, document, and report on your local coordination activities. For digital equity plans, state must define quantitative and qualitative success metrics, and all local coordination activities that result in action items, feedback, and comments should be appropriately documented and tracked, and grant recipients should establish communication channels to provide visibility to stakeholders into this documentation so that they're aware of how their feedback is being incorporated. And finally, grant recipients should plan to consistently engage with stakeholders as planning efforts progress. This establishes transparency and accountability for the grant recipients, and it also ensures that stakeholders are involved and feel involved in the development of these plans. So documentation of local coordination activities is not only a key component of the BEAD and state digital equity planning grant programs, but it's important into providing visibility into ongoing efforts and establishing trust with those stakeholders. NTIA will provide technical assistance resources to support states and territories in documentation of local coordination activities. But as grant recipients begin to prepare for or conduct outreach, you might want to consider documenting contact information for each stakeholder or organization, so you have that information easily and readily available to you. Tracking the engagement mechanism used to conduct local coordination activities, so you can assess what works best for various stakeholder groups. Tracking all your meeting notes, including comments and plans. Ensuring, this is key, ensuring that stakeholders are aware of how their comments will be incorporated into the plans, and also reasons why they may not have been incorporated. And then finally, tracking action items that result, that come out of your engagement activities and the status of addressing action items. So I want to thank you all for listening and joining in on today's webinar. And we're now going to open up the floor for questions. Thank you.
As you can see, local coordination truly is a cornerstone of the Internet for All programs, and NTIA has a fantastic team who collectively have a wealth of experience in this topic. So please don't be shy. Go ahead and submit your questions. I see a couple of them have already been submitted. And so maybe we can start with this one. One of our attendees asked, as a California manufacturer of fiber, optic, and copper data products, what is the process to get in touch with stakeholders and interested parties for this infrastructure project? Maybe Amanda, could you take that question?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. So the states and territories that are accepting the SPEED funding have an obligation to go out and find stakeholders to engage with them. But we also recommend that stakeholders proactively reach out to the state broadband offices to get involved, to find out what's going on, to connect, to go ahead and start building those relationships. And so the best advice there is to reach out directly to the state broadband offices in the states that you're located.
Great, thanks, Amanda. And so we had a couple other questions related to national communication strategy for outreach and engagement. Maybe Amanda, you can take that one as well.
Yeah, happy to talk a little bit about kind of our approach to this. There's certainly activity that's going on at the national level. NTIA has other programs that are pushing out national messages. We work with our other partners at the FCC, for example, to push out national messages about how to access the Affordable Connectivity Program, for example. And there's certainly a lot of work that's going on at the national level. Specific to these local coordination requirements, though, these are really things that we want to be driven at the state level. So we really want to it's a requirement for states and territories that they accept this money, that they then go out into the local communities. And so what we're really trying to do is push this effort further down to get more to the local level, so that we can ensure that all of those stakeholders at the local level have their voices heard, help us identify what the needs are and what the right solutions are to address those needs. So while there are certainly ongoing efforts at the national level, these kind of local coordination requirements and strategies that we talked about today are really about how states fulfill their obligations under the BEAD and DE program, so that these programs are even more effective as they're being rolled out and this money is getting invested into the communities.
Thanks, Amanda. Another question for Michelle, maybe you can take this one. Mm-hmm. If community stakeholders want to have meaningful engagement at the state level, in their state broadband offices, what should they do? What are some strategies that you might suggest?
That's a good question. I recommend that they reach out to their state broadband offices, set up meetings, be clear and state in meeting with the state broadband offices, be clear and state the issues and the barriers to affordability, adoption. I also recommend that they talk about some of the existing programs or resources that they have, maybe they're leading or exist in the community. I think they could be a resource to the state broadband office. And I would be very clear about what they hope to see in both the BEAD and DE plans as well.
Great, thanks, Michelle. So let's see, we have a few others here. For digital equity planning, what info should we focus on collecting from stakeholders and covered population representatives? What types of questions should be asked? So I guess, Michelle, you could maybe take that one as well.
So so list of questions. I might lean on Amanda for this as well, but so with the cover populations, I would just start with just asking questions always about barriers and issues. That's always a good, place. With the areas related to the NOFO, like workforce, education, and like health outcomes, those would be questions I would also ask to the various different covered populations as well. That's a good starting place.
Great, great. Thank you. So let's see, we have a number of questions regarding, I think I actually, am I still on my Zoom? Just
Yeah, we can still hear you. We can
I'm
still
still
hear
on.
you.
Okay, so we have a number of questions regarding Adam's portion of the presentation. Unfortunately, we'll have to direct those to the Internet for All email address, right, Amanda? But he's not available at this time.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to some of them. I think one of the questions was about the definition of tribal lands, and so we do actually have in our NOFOs, we kind of have the full description of what the technical definition of those are, but it's land that's located within the boundaries of an Indian reservation, a pueblo. There's kind of several other details that go into that are specific for some of the unique circumstances in each state. And so we just kind of recommend that you take a look at the specific NOFO language there. And then I think hopefully we can circle back to some of those other questions if Adam's able to jump back on and join us.
Okay, sounds good. We have a number of other questions. Let's continue to get into them. Let's see. Can we share any additional resources, templates that NTIA might have to share related to local coordination? What other resources do you recommend, or what beyond this wonderful webinar, if there are additional resources? I think this attendee is asking where they might find that. Julia, would you be able to speak to that?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways to, we will be coming up with resources for local coordination, and they'll be posted on our state and local government pages as well as our program pages. But in the meantime, until we have those ready, I think maybe just doing something simple as for state, starting with the distribution lists that you already have access to and that you're using regularly, particularly the broadband office, to communicate with people. That can start as a contact list for you as you're doing your community engagement and working with other stakeholders. Just start building lists, start building databases of people that you are connecting with, cataloging some of the issues that they've raised, discussing figuring out how you're going to incorporate that into your BEAD plans, and also how you followed up with them, because these are all key pieces that that you'll have to be reporting on to meet your local coordination requirements.
Great, thank you, Julia. Another question: how does this outreach program differentiate from affordable connectivity outreach grant? One of our attendees asked that question. Amanda, would you be able to address?
Yeah, so these specific to these local coordination requirements, these are really connected to the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program and the Digital Equity Program that NTIA is administering. So what we went over today was a lot of kind of what you have to do to satisfy the requirements of those programs. These are certainly connected to other outreach about the affordable connectivity program and other things that are going on in the state that we would love for you to align and coordinate those efforts with. Ultimately, both the BEAD program and the digital equity program are about how we close the digital divide in all of these states. And so it's really about kind of putting all of those pieces together. So anything that furthers that goal is supportive of this program. And so, we certainly, one of the things that we highlighted earlier was about not reinventing the wheel, not, taking advantage of existing opportunities to convene. And I think it's great when you pull a group together to be able to educate them about multiple things. So you may be pulling together a group to get their input on the digital equity plan and the BEAD plans that a state is developing. And that's also a great opportunity to be able to promote the Affordable Connectivity Program while they're there. Like, make sure all of the stakeholders know that they can go to getinternet.gov and sign up, or have resources available for ACP there in the languages of that are commonly spoken by the people that you're inviting. It's a great opportunity to really look for those ways to coordinate across the board.
Great, thank you, Amanda. And I believe we have about just a little bit more time left. 1 minute, we can maybe stick in one more question here. Let's see. Team members, if you have suggestions as to what next one we could address in the time that we have left.
I think there was a great question regarding local coordination and reaching out for Julia in our chat. Like,
Oh, I think so.
What are some of the strategies for reaching out to local government?
Yeah, thanks,
Yes.
Michelle. For state broadband offices, obviously utilize your municipal leagues, your county associations, your township associations. That is the best way that that you'll be able to reach all of the local governments in your state. A lot of states also have state associations of regional councils. So I encourage you to work with them. And then if you're at the local level, work regionally. A lot of regional councils are already doing this work of local coordination. So start there. They do it on transportation. They do it on community planning. So just bring broadband into the mix. So, and there are a lot of regional councils that are doing great work on broadband. So reach out to us and we can put you in touch with them to learn some of the strategies that they're employing on broadband efforts.
Great, great. Thank you, Julia. Okay, so I think we are at time. Thanks everyone for attending and participating. As a housekeeping matter, just want to remind you all that the webinar and the transcript will be posted on the Internet for All website for your viewing and sharing. And so any other concluding remarks, Amanda, Michelle, Julia?
I'll just say we weren't able to get to all of the questions. So please, if your question didn't get answered, please feel free to submit it to internetforall@ntia.gov, and we can get back to you there as well.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you all. Have a great day.